Birth of the Psychedelic Renaissance.
Nature develops up to a certain point and then leaves us to develop further. Evolution in this case will mean the development of certain inner qualities and features which usually remain undeveloped. Piotr Ouspensky. The world where everything is known. Maria Sabina's gift. We ate the mushrooms, and I had a vision. I spoke to God, who each time I felt to be more familiar, closer to me. I felt as if everything that surrounded me was God. Young Maria Sabina. She was quite familiar with those mushrooms. She had spent many days out in the grazing fields of Huautla de Jimenez. The way their deep brown hue freckled the verdant symphonies meant that such saint children, or little saints, as they were also called, were instantly recognizable to her. In the pastures, herding goats and chickens. This time they took special note of the decorative mushrooms that sprinkled the landscape. Maria Sabina's curiosity got the best of her. She found a small, solitary mushroom and pulled it from the ground, then another, and another. Once the dizziness passed, the two girls felt rather well and agreeable within the space of the little saints. They felt their souls leave their bodies and enter a new world, a strange world, a world where everything is known. Palaces and bejeweled temples spun out of corners and foregrounds of this enchanted space. What's more, the sisters occupied that same space, like two sleeping people sharing the same dream. The little saints presented themselves as dwarfs and children playing trumpets, singing and dancing. These beings as gentle and inviting as the flesh of flowers. Maria Sabina and Anna suddenly felt a presence. These mushrooms were conscious, an intelligence every bit as real as their own. They continued to eat the mushrooms day after day, going deeper and deeper into the world where everything is known. On one occasion, a well-dressed man appeared before Maria Sabina and told her, "Kneel down, kneel and pray." Maria Sabina kneeled and prayed. She spoke to God, who grew more and more familiar to her, the more she ate the little ones who spring forth. Eventually she realized that the mushrooms gave wisdom, cured illnesses. The years went by and Maria Sabina honed her skills as a curandera. Later, writers would remember her as La Señora Sin Manca, a woman without sin. Maria Sabina had a different approach. She rounded up some little saints, asked for their blessings, and pleaded that they teach her how to find the cure. She fed her sister 3 of the little saints and ate an exorbitant amount herself. 30 plus 30. She loved her sister and would journey to the farthest reaches of the world, where everything is known, to find the cure. Far into the depths of that space, surrounded by music played by a trumpet, dulcimer, and violin, she found herself before a table where about 7 of the principal ones sat. The principal ones, the mushrooms, anthropomorphized, epitomized goodness, healing, wisdom, and charity. They knew all that could be known in the world, where everything is known. They guarded epiphany from the unworthy, and understood the beginning and end of all the mysteries of existence. A large book, the Book of Wisdom, manifested on the table where sat the principal ones. The tome kept expanding larger until it grew to the size of a human. Maria Sabina, this is the Book of Wisdom, a principal one said. It is the book of language. Everything that is written in it is for you. The book is yours. Take it so that you can work. Maria Sabina went from an apprentice to a curandera. I understood all that was written in the book, and became as though richer, wiser, and that in one moment I learned millions of things. One of those learned things was how to cure Anna. First she had to undo all that the previous curanderos had done. And her sister was healed, indeed. Soon word spread beyond the village, from as far away as Tenango, 15 miles to the east, and San Juan Coatzapan, 13 miles to the south. The people came, desperate for cures. With each new case, no matter how puzzling the cause and cure of sickness, Maria Sabina was able to look up the proper remedies from the Book of Wisdom. Other times she would simply sit with the principal ones, drink beers with them, and discuss treatments for the infirm. Critics of chemical mysticism. Nothing could be more repugnant to this cultural tradition than the notion of spiritual or psychological growth through the use of drugs. Alan Watts. There existed a problem, as Huxley diagnosed. The mental climate of our age is not favorable to visionaries. Those who have such spontaneous experiences and are unwise enough to talk about them are looked on with suspicion and told that they ought to see a psychiatrist. This is one of the reasons, though not perhaps the only reason, why there were more visionaries in earlier centuries than there are today. Who could forget the way other scientists derided electrical engineer Guglielmo Marconi, 1874 to 1937, for stupidly thinking that invisible pulses could be sent, unfelt and undetected, through the air? The earth is round, claimed the experts, and radio waves go straight. However, as we may surmise with hindsight in our favor, only Marconi was laughing after accepting his Nobel Prize for sending a wireless signal over a mile away from its point of origin. We today call this once discredited magic Wi-Fi. But this raised a very interesting question. If we could transmit radio waves through the air, could we not also send thoughts and intentions similarly? The paranormal was real. It just hadn't been discovered, dissected, and classified by science yet. That's how Haywood justified her experiments with LSD and ESP. Perhaps somewhere in the outer regions, through the space dust of what we oft call today cosmic consciousness, there was a path that could lead anyone into the world of psychic abilities, contacting entities and various sorts of preternatural activities. The dance. Sometime in 1952. Such experiences led Haywood to want to test the powers of ESP in various altered states, well aware that doctors at the time believed that LSD and mescaline caused a temporary condition of schizophrenia. Haywood rejected such interpretations. Instead, she felt that the psychic state of awareness resembled those induced by mescaline and other hallucinogens, and so she found herself in Mayor Gross' office, having taken an amount of mescaline that is lost to us, which plunged her into the depths of her subconscious, trying to find the oddest areas of esoteric awareness available to the human mind. We can imagine a rather drab clinical setting in 1952, but Haywood's set had been primed for a mystical experience since her childhood, so much so that it overrode the uninspired setting, which her own thoughts had transformed into an array of majestic patterns. Mayor Gross' questions felt inane at this point of the journey. Any words she tried to use to describe the patterns would be so misleading that it is almost better to say nothing, she replied to Mayor Gross. Why misleading? He probed. Because if I said they were solid, you would think I meant they were solid. I can't see them. It is the awareness of pattern. Now you are trying to make me divide them up into one or another, and you can't do that. You can't say a great mass of pattern. It is pattern. Haywood sunk even deeper into the experience, into the hinterland of essence. The hinterland of essence, Mayor Gross thought? What is the most pleasant of the images you have just seen? The pure light at the top of the mountain, Haywood replied. She closed her eyes and drifted deeper and deeper into herself, further into the symbols of universal interrelatedness of mystics, artists, saints, and sensitives. In answer to Mayor Gross' question, she continued. The interrelatedness was symbolized by a delicate spider web, which linked everything to everything, from atom to nebula. Nothing was static. The entire universe was in constant fluid movement. Gradually I became aware of that movement as a crucial fact. It was the dance, the interweaving, eternal, impersonal relentlessness, inevitable cosmic dance, the dance of beingness. I saw the God, the Krishna, dancing. I cried out in extremely light. Here appeared a supreme figure, motionless, Buddha-like, eternally at peace. This entity was the Divine Mother. She spoke. You are being shown the universe before the principle of communication, which is love, has been injected into it. A couple of days after the experience, while cooking lunch, Haywood experienced the first recorded flashback in history. Granted, the term, as least with regards to reliving psychedelic experiences, didn't exist. Yet, so instead, she termed the occurrence a throwback. The Divine Mother appeared in her kitchen, not visually, but as a presence. Nonetheless, her presence spoke. The universe could not become conscious of its unity until the principle of communication, which was the kind of love she had made me aware of, had been injected into it. And it was Haywood's job to bring that love into the world, for the benefit of all humankind. The visit invigorated her. How simple tasks like cooking lunch seemed so much more important, less like a chore and more like an ecstatic act of service. It had tweaked my eyes open, as she reflects. Now at least I know that my eyes are shut, that my senses are merely parochial, and that to take my yapping little ego at all seriously is quite ridiculous. And of course, everyone had an opinion about her experience. The Freudians went right to work. It's obvious, they said. Your Divine Mother was a construct of your own. You were, doubtless, brought up in an Edwardian nursery and saw too little of your own mother. The Jungians tripped over themselves to label the Divine Mother an archetype, while the eyes of Catholics would light up with reverence, and interpret Haywood's retelling of her encounter to blurt out Our Lady. The most egregious interpretation came from a psychiatrist who explained to Haywood that the Divine Mother was her own mental projection of herself. These misunderstandings and somewhat arrogant analyses at first bothered Haywood, but only for a moment. Then she realized how silly the whole idea of judgment really was, in the grander scheme of things. Pretentious claims from the scientific class meant nothing to her anymore. Haywood felt unified. Huxley, on the other hand, had been looking for a new pleasure derived from the invention of a new drug since as early as 1931. After scouring the literature of sacramental intoxicants in various societies, he chanced upon a dusty and neglected, ponderous work by a German pharmacologist. The German pharmacologist was Louis Lewin. The neglected volume, his drug lexicon Fantastica, from 1924. Lewin's research had led to his discovery that many Fantastica are said to bestow a like gift of divination to various tribal peoples the world over. Fascinated by such ideas, Huxley sought his own visionary experience. He felt that it wasn't the tribal cultures that lacked religiosity, but rather that it was the rich and highly educated whites who have left ourselves bare behind. His next step was locating a fantasticum to ingest, and a doctor to help navigate his journey to that outlandish place in his mind that he would later name the other world. Osmond continued his studies with mescaline and LSD, hoping to give it to between 50 and 100 persons with special gifts and high abilities. One of his volunteers, Katz, wrote that vacillating account of mescaline. New doors, new possibilities, slowly opened, leaving the psychological gestalt and seeing the experience through a mystical lens. Katz also gives us an early description of synesthesia, though he does not seem to have been familiar with the term. My senses of feeling, smelling, and hearing ran amok. It was as though someone had rooted out the nerve nets in my brain which control the senses, then joined them together again without thought of their proper placings. It wasn't all hell, though. Eventually, Katz broke through. He recalls, "At times I beheld visions of dazzling beauty, visions so rapturous, so unearthly. I lived in a paradise, where the sky was a mass of jewels, the air was filled with sheets of rainbow light, all constantly changing in color, design, texture, and dimension, so that each scene was more lovely than the one which preceded." People under the influence of LSD or mescaline will think they are going mad, when in fact they are beginning, when they take it, to go sane, or at least to understand what going sane must be like. The British Broadcasting Company BBC had decided that filming Mayhew's journey with mescaline might prove an interesting and worthy news story. It was Osmond with whom Mayhew had been in regular correspondence, who had first mentioned how mescaline disabled the filter that protected mind from mind at large. Even without Osmond and Huxley's influence, Mayhew had been prepping for such a mystical, as opposed to schizophrenic, interpretation of the mescaline state. He had just published his book, Men Seeking God, from 1955, so felt it entirely possible that mescaline merely enabled him to experience what he was predisposed to experience. Unfortunately, a backlash from a group of psychologists, psychiatrists, and theologians. Why is this not surprising? Prevented the BBC footage from ever seeing the airwaves. Far from beaten, Mayhew published an account of his experience in the London Observer. He pulled no punches. Can these drugs give us fresh insights into the mysteries of human knowledge and purpose, even into the nature of reality itself? It seems as though the same detachment from the pull of our senses which characterizes religious experience can be achieved in entirely irreligious ways. Of course it can. Huxley didn't care for the name and opted for a word that was euphonious and easy to pronounce, and has relatives in the jargon of psychology. So he marshaled his own possibilities based around the ancient Greek phanerein, meaning that which makes itself available to human perception. Psychophans or phaneropsychic, both more or less meaning mind-revealing, would do nicely. But the word he felt best fit this description was phanerotime, a mix of the verb phanerein and thymos, the Greek word for soul. Beautiful idea, actually. But, as we now know, the name that stuck was another. It was Osmond that bursted into the world. Why are we always preoccupied with the pathological, the negative? Is health only the lack of sickness? Osmond went on to list a battery of possible new names for mind chemicals, and his personal choice was psychedelic, which means mind manifesting. They also looked at Amanita muscaria during the 1950s. Bouverie had taken the time to scrawl a crude drawing of the drug to which he referred. Stone wasn't sure of the name, but he could describe it very easily. It wasn't a drug like the kind one might find while perusing the aisles high on mescaline at the world's biggest drugstore. Nor was it a natural plant. It was, in fact, a mushroom, a large mushroom with an orange-yellow top and white flecks. The classic fairy-tale mushroom, the Amanita muscaria. Could this be the answer? Could this be the substance that would open the doors of ESP in a big way? Puharich tested the mushroom on 37 volunteers, hoping to find the thread that led a person to psychic states of awareness through a psychedelic vector. Winter-spring 1955. Andrea Puharich busily continued his work with Amanita muscaria and ESP, now with LSD as a second substance for sensitives to try during his ESP experiments. He also created the Round Table Foundation in Glen Cove, Maine, courtesy of 3 generous grants, first from Joyce Borden Balokovich Harris to Borden Dairy Farms, his former employer as a young boy. Balokovich introduced him to Bouverie. Last on board was Marcella Miller Dupont, who worked in chemicals and weaponry. These 3 women had deep pockets and nonconformist ideas. Egalitarian in nature, the new organization took its name from King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. They invited parapsychologists like Eileen Garrett to test psychic powers on electronic devices. Another experiment was most intriguing. Tradition held that the Amanita muscaria did not grow in Maine. But this did not stop Round Table from trying to find it. To do so, Puharich, using an Ouija board, attempted to contact Maria Sabina, timing the experiment perfectly. This was for science, after all. Maria Sabina ate her mushrooms at the appropriate hour. That the parapsychologist in Maine dabbled with the board. Sure enough, they contacted Maria Sabina, and she told them where to find Amanita muscaria mushrooms in Maine. In any event, Puharich and the Round Table fell into Huxley's crosshairs as yet another potential donor for Osmond's research. In early March, Osmond and Bouverie received an invitation to stay with Huxley in Los Angeles to discuss such possibilities. However, no Round Table money exchanged. Instead, Bouverie and Puharich invited Huxley to Maine to see for himself what the foundation was up to.
Look at this beauty. Oh, so beautiful.